Hello, welcome to our continuing study in the Old Testament. My aim and plan has just been to give you a basic understanding of the storyline that carries through the Old Testament so that you can know where other things fit into place. And so we've looked at the books that carry the storyline: Genesis, from the beginning, the founding of Israel, the patriarch, Exodus, and leaving Egypt and starting a journey to the Promised Land, Numbers, that carries their story on their journey. But we're missing out the book of Deuteronomy, a wonderful book. I encourage you to read it, and a very important book, often quoted in the New Testament, quoted by Jesus in the temptation. But Deuteronomy literally means the second giving of the law. The law had been given at Sinai during the journey through the wilderness. The generation that had heard that, those that were 20 years above, had died out. And now the new generation that's going to go in and possess the land and inherit the promises need to be reminded of God's law. But there is very little that is fresh in the book of Deuteronomy, in a sense, except the death of Moses and the indication that Joshua is going to take over from him. And of course, the great song of Moses that he sings in praise to God. So we're now going to come to the book of Joshua, one of my favourite books. The people of Israel have marched through the Promised Land. They're on the journey to enter, and Joshua is the book that takes us into that Promised Land, that victory. Now, I can't imagine how daunting a job it would have been for Joshua to take over from Moses. He'd been his assistant for 40 years. He'd been there alongside him. At times he'd stayed in the tabernacle when the glory of God had come down, and he'd shown himself to be a man of faith. When sent as one of the 12 spies into the Promised Land, he comes back with a good report, had seen all the problems, but was confident that God was able to help them. And now he is leader, and God says something to him: Moses, my servant, is dead. And sometimes we've got to realize the past is the past. No matter how good the past was, the past is the past. And Joshua is going to need courage. And so in Joshua 1:9, it says those lovely verses: be strong and of a good courage, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. What a wonderful promise as you start out on an amazing adventure before God. And that adventure is going to start with great challenges. He doesn't get an easy lead-in to the time of leadership. He is faced straight away with major problems. And the first major problem that he is faced with is that of preparing the people to cross a river that the scripture says was in flood. Now, experts, because I depend on them, tell me that the river at that time and at that point would be up to 1.5 miles wide in the time of the flood. Now, Joshua has got to say to the people, look, you've been walking through a wilderness where you've depended on water from a rock and the occasional oasis that you've met along the way. Now you're going to cross a river that is 1.5 miles wide, and you're going to walk across. And the first people he has to convince are the priests, because they are going to carry the ark of God first in front, showing that the presence of God leads us into difficult situations, and that the priesthood should be people who are ready to proceed in faith. And so they go forward. But there is an interesting thing that is often overlooked, that God does miracles in different ways. God does not have to repeat himself. When they crossed the Red Sea, there was a river to cross, but it says that God caused the wall of the river to stand as walls on either side of them, and they marched across in the middle. As Joshua is crossing the Jordan, it's a different story. It says the water stopped upstream, it stopped flowing, so there wasn't a wall of water on either side of them. They had a different miracle. It's also interesting to notice this, that they could have crossed into the promised land in many different places. They could have gone back to Kadesh Barnea, where they'd had their first opportunity to go in, no river to cross. They could have gone up onto the road of the kings, right up on the northern route, which they'd begun to take when they first left Egypt, and there would have been no river to cross. But sometimes God brings us to places that are difficult for us to challenge our faith, but not only to challenge our faith, but to give us the opportunity to start that new life and that journey in a great confidence that the all-powerful, almighty God is with us. And so he brings them to a place at the most difficult time. He brings them to a place that is going to be very different to anything they faced before. And not only that, he brings them to a place that is right opposite Jericho. Now, why does God do some of the things that he does? We don't always understand until we look back and reflect on what God has done. Now, just to carry the story forward before we come back to that, Joshua sends in 2 spies to just have a look over the land. I'm not fully sure of what they're going to come back with, except a report of what's happening in the land. They look it out, they realise what's happening. They have to hide in the house of Rahab. They're covered over by flax so that when the guards come, Rahab lies to them to allow the men to escape the next day. But one thing that Rahab tells them is this: the people are in fear of you. Now, they are fearful for 2 reasons. One, because of what had happened at the Red Sea. Now, this had happened 40 years previously, and yet the people of Jericho said, we remember what God did at the Red Sea. Now, that is an amazing thing, that sometimes the enemies of God's people remember more what God has done than what we remember. But the second thing they remembered was that they had defeated the Amorites, Zion, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan. And that was much more recent. So they knew that the past and recent history showed that God was for them. Just an interesting thing on Og, king of Bashan, that you may not realise, is that he is the most frequently mentioned giant in the Bible. It is not Goliath. I believe you'll find that Goliath is only mentioned by name once in the Bible, and he's just referred to as the giant in other situations. But God can do it, whether it's opening a way through the Red Sea or whether it's defeating the great king Zion and Og. And the people in Jericho knew this, and their hearts were melting with fear. So they proceed to cross the river. They come in sight of this great walled city, so tall, so high, that it said that chariots could be ridden around the top of the walls. And an army looking down on them. Obviously, the Israelites thought they would be feeling secure, whereas the truth is that they were feeling frightened. And as Joshua goes to look at the daunting prospect before him, perhaps trying to work out some plan in how to take this city, he encounters this man who describes himself as the commander-in-chief of the armies of the Lord. Now, it is obviously what we would refer to as a theophany or a Christophany. That is a pre-incarnation appearance of Christ. This is the Lord coming to show he is fighting battles for his people. Joshua falls at his feet and listens to everything he says. Now, the command is a strange command. They fought many battles on their journey to the promised land, but this one is a command to march around the city, and you to do it every day for 6 days, and then on the 7th day you're to go around again 7 times this time, and you're not to fire weapons, you're not to do anything other than shout praise to God. And the story is that the walls fell down. But Rahab and her family had believed the spies. The spies had said, you're to hang a red cord out of your window, and this will be a symbol that your home will not be destroyed, a home that was actually built into the wall. And of course, there's a picture here that in the Exodus, they had the blood on the door, the red blood of the lamb. And here there is a red cord from the window that is bringing protection for people who have put their trust in God. And we will come back to Rahab in a little while, because there are important things about her story. Now, for 40 years, the people had lived on miracles. In fact, they had seen more miracles in the wilderness than they are to see in the promised land, because every day God provided them with manna, he provided them with water, their shoes were not wearing out, their clothes were not wearing out. There was a pillar of fire to guide them by day, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. There was the serpent lifted up in the wilderness. All sorts of miracles happening in the wilderness. But now they're in the promised land, and it says that the manna ceased. They no longer needed a miracle. And I've often said it would be great when the day comes when we don't need miracles of healing because we've got health. That would be far better. But right now we need miracles of healing, and we can believe for miracles of healing because we have a good God who gives good gifts to his children. But for now, the people of God have inherited lands that they didn't build, fields that they didn't sow, and it is a land of milk and honey. Now, it's a strange expression to us, but honey means that there are plants to be fertilized, that there are flowers that are growing, and that there is honey to be gathered, because all the bees are busy with all this act of pollinating the crops. And there's a land of milk because that means the animals are grazing. The cattle, the goats, the sheep that are producing the milk are there because there is plenty of abundance for the people in whatever they need, their meat and their vegetables and their fruit, if you like to look at it that way. So Jericho is destroyed. The people are victorious. They run in and they shout and celebrate. But there are more battles. This is why the promised land is not a perfect picture in any way of heaven, because This is a perfect picture of entering into blessing in the Christian life, because the battles continue, just as they do for us as God's people. And they have to face the next city, which is a city called Ai, a smaller city, much more easy. And they've just had this glorious victory, this easy victory. And so Ai is going to be no problem to them at all. And so they say, we don't need to send the whole army. We'll just send a few men. We will just find this easy. But they didn't. The reason was that there were two things that were happening simultaneously, two sins in the hearts of the people. Firstly, there was the sin of presumption. We should never presume that we can do things for God in our own power. And we must always come back to the Lord and say, Lord, what would you have us do? What is your plan and your purpose for us in this? The second is a sin of disobedience. The people have been told when they enter Jericho that they are not to take any of the spoils of battle. They're not to take it as loot for their own use, but the city is to be devoted to the Lord. But one man, Achan, had decided that there was a beautiful Babylonian garment. That shows the trade that was still going on throughout the world in those days. And there was some silver and some gold, and he took it for himself. Now, that would seem a personal thing, but God sees it as this, that sin affects the whole body. It's like yeast that works through the whole loaf. And that same picture is there in the New Testament when Ananias and Sapphira lied to God. It's a matter that could affect the whole body, and God takes that seriously. And in those two instances, God wants to show us how serious it is, how important it is to treat the Lord. Now, we have no information that any such other occurrence happened again, but Achan is brought before the people, and Achan is killed, is stoned, is buried. And it's a reminder to the people that they are to obey the Lord wholeheartedly, and that sin should not be part of God's people. In fact, a phrase is used that you made us liable to destruction. Now that is an awful thing to think that we have caused. Another thing happens in chapter 8 that is very important. God told them not to make alliances with other nations and other peoples, because they were to possess the whole land for themselves. However, there were some people who came, one of the tribes of the land of Canaan, the Gibeonites, decided to deceive the people of God. And their deception was very clever. They decided to dress in old clothes. They decided to take old wine sacks. They decided to take stale bread, and they came as leaders to the Israelites. We have come on a long, long journey, and we have come to make an alliance with you. And again, the people of God fail to seek the Lord about this. And they make an alliance with the Gibeonites, and then find out later that they're near neighbours, people that they should not have made an alliance with. And so what happens? God says, look, you're not going to destroy them because of this. You're going to make an agreement with them, and they're going to become your servants, your helpers. Now, there's an important thing in this story. We're living in days when Israel is under attack, when people are attacking God. Now, if they had driven out all the people God told them to drive out, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, we wouldn't have today's problems. But they never ever drove them out. That's why even a few hundred years later, David is still having problems with the Philistines, because the people failed to fully carry out God's commands. If it had been carried out in those early days of conquer and victory, then future problems would have been not taking place. Now, you may feel it would be cruel, and some people have accused God of the Old Testament, and there is only one God. He's still the God of the New Testament. That they've accused him of being cruel, because he said, destroy these people, drive out these people. But there are a few snippets within this story that tell us things could be different. Rahab was saved because she helped the people of God and that her family. The Gibeonites were saved because they planned a way to make an alliance, and they used wisdom. Others, rightly, wisely, fled. They didn't have to be destroyed. If I was told that somebody was going to come and blow me up in my house, I'd move out. And that's exactly what some of the people did in the land of Canaan. When the Israelites came in, they moved away. Others, like the Gibeonites, planned a way of staying in friendship with them and alliance. And God makes all sorts of ways. He's not a cruel God. He's a God who loves reconciliation and redemption. So remember that when you read the stories in the Old Testament. God is setting a standard of purity to protect us for the future, but is also making a way where those who are genuine can find a way of escape from God's judgment. So many other battles carry on, because life is one battle for them as they take over the land, and then it is allotted to the various tribes. And we come to the end, the latter chapters. Chapter 20 is an interesting chapter about the graciousness of God. And he sets up cities of refuge throughout the land. And the cities of refuge had a purpose, that if someone was angry with somebody and wanted to bring judgment on them for something they had done, they were living under that eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth situation, that the person who was in fear could flee to a city of refuge, and they would be safe there while the high priest lived, and they could have a fair trial and be assured that no swift judgment would be brought on him. If an accident had happened, an axe head had flown off and hit somebody on the head, and one of the relatives was angry and looking for vengeance, they couldn't take vengeance in the city of refuge. So in specified locations that were easy for the people to reach, there were these cities where they were safe and they could have the assurance of protection. And our God is a refuge for us, a very present help in the time of our need. Now, some of the tribes of Israel had decided, as they'd been on the eastern banks of the Jordan, this is all we want. This land is sufficient for us. We want to stay here. And an agreement had been made that if they went over and fought for God's people until they inherited the land of Canaan, that they could return at some point, and that would be their homeland. And that's exactly what happens, and they are sent back and they are thanked. It does give rise to a few problems later when misunderstandings took place, but they inherited. They were settling for less than God's best. What they had was good. It was better than Egypt. It was better than the wilderness, but it was not as good as God had promised them. We must not come short of inheriting the fullness of God's blessing. After a long life, Joshua realizes his time's up. It's good to know when that comes, and he's prepared for it. And he encourages the people to follow the Lord with all their heart. He reminds them of the goodness of God and what God has done for them. And then he says those words that have become very well known to us in Joshua 24, verse 15. If serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors that they served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and for my household, we will serve the Lord. And what a glorious way to conclude that, but we will serve the Lord. Joshua, who had served Moses. Joshua, who had served the Lord faithfully. Joshua, who had brought the people into the land of promise. He's going with that glorious thing. My family is going to continue what I've done. Thank you for watching. God bless you.